All right, it's Brother Rob Wilson. How do you do today? As I promised yesterday, after I did the video, the psychopathic problem of the white mind, which was a shocking teaching that was done at Yale University by a registered psychiatrist. I'll put a link to that right here. Okay. I'll put a link to that video so that you don't miss that. Um, what's even more shocking is the cultural support and lack of backlash from someone such as Marc Lamont Hill. He had the person who advocated these remarks on his show, and in my opinion, his lack of response to this type of criteria tells tells it all. He basically brought the proponent of of, of some extremely violent statements on his show in a manner to defend and to contradict the opposition to hearing when you're dealing with a narcissist or a psychopath, they do these and say the most extreme things, and then they try to gaslight you and act like it wasn't as bad as it sounded or as bad as it was. Well, it was worse. Let's check out. So I brought this up as a response. This is the interview with Marc Lamont Hill, and I'm doing a reaction on it. And again, he's got exclusive interview with psychiatrist Dr. Aruna Khilanani, who is the person who gave this teaching to a group of psychiatrists. And again, the doctor needs a doctor. Very troubling. Let's go ahead and get right into this.
A Black News Tonight exclusive. Last week, we covered how during a virtual talk at the Yale School of Medicine, Dr. Aruna Khilanani, who is a forensic psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, used language that some considered violent and hostile. Take a listen.
I had fantasies of unloading a revolver into the head of any white person that got in my way, burying their body, and wiping my bloody hands as I walked away relatively guiltless, with a gun to my chest, like I did the world a favor.
Some considered shocking and out of line. And she's going to end up saying that she was taken out of context. But look at this doctor's appearance as she comes on the show. She realizes she's done something wrong. But what a narcissist and a psychopath does when they've done something wrong, they double down in their denial. So the very person who's giving this speech, the psychopathic problem of the white mind, displays every sign of psychopathy and narcissism. All psychopaths are narcissists, but not all narcissists are psychopathic. This individual seems to be a psychopath, a narcissistic psychopath.
After the speech, the Yale School of Medicine released a statement that said, "We weighed our grave concern about the extreme hostility, imagery of violence, and profanity expressed by the speaker against our commitment to freedom of expression." And they decided to make the talk available only to people who attended it. Joining me now is forensic psychiatrist and psychoanalyst Dr. Aruna Khilanani. Thank you so much for joining me on Black News Tonight.
Hi, thanks for having me here.
Absolutely. Let's start with April 6th. You gave a virtual talk at Yale.
Yeah.
What was your intention? What was the premise of the?
She knows her comments are inexcusable, but somehow and for some reason, this individual thinks that their verbal statements and their conduct is above reproach. This is reproachable. This is uh, unacceptable. This is unacceptable behavior in our universities. And if these universities that are allowing and advocating this receive a dime of financial assistance, everyone needs to speak up. A dime.
Talk for you.
So, the intention is to actually talk about unconscious negative feelings. Because if we're not actually aware of unconscious negative feelings, it's going to turn into a violent action. And people who are actually can access and tolerate negative feelings are mentally healthier. So, of course, I don't want to kill white people. That's completely ludicrous. But
Of course, I don't want to kill white people, but let me tell you the type of rhetoric she puts out about fantasizing to kill white people. This is exactly the type of fantasy I would expect a white supremacist or an actual racist to have. This is the the pulse and the heartbeat of racism and hatred, racial hatred and division. This person is not qualified to teach a psychiatrist. And yes, when you deal with suppressed underlying feelings, and psychopaths are known to fantasize. Not everyone. See, this is what's so crazy. This individual defines the world as how she is. Okay, not everyone fantasizes about killing people. Hello, but it's a fact that psychopaths fantasize about killing people, about power and unlimited power and control. That's the psychopathic fantasy.
I think through my words, white people feel like they're actually getting murdered because my words are troubling. It's going to cause the death of their preferred self image, their image that they've had through colonialism of being good, helping, and teaching.
Okay, again, this is an individual who is ascribing to other people their self image of themselves, who is not one. And this is the person who, these are the people, individual critical theory divides everyone up into different racial groups. The exact epitome of what racism is. And those people think, and this belief that all of those people think this, that, or the other, or do this, that, or the other, that's what racism is. That's the heartbeat of racism. And again, she thinks that her talk makes people feel like they're dying. I'm not feeling like I'm dying. I'm shocked that someone can be so uh, overtly racist in their remarks and overtly hateful in their murderous fantasies, whether she has them now or has had them in the past, and she's dealt with them. The underlying cause of such fantasy is the feeling that you are oppressed, the feeling that you are uh, a victim. And that's another thing that is classic symptom of narcissism, the feeling that no one gets you, no one understands you, that you're a victim. This is what teaching the victim psychology and enabling the psychology of victimhood, this is what it produces. And then to sit there and say that our white people's image of themselves as being threatened as good, as teaching, as whatever she said. Um, for individuals to whom that's true of all races, and then you throw the overt accusations of white supremacy or racist on people who treat people in the same way as they want to be treated, or they're not color blind because, like I've said before, we can't be colorblind because we have to realize our distinctions, and we have to realize when some people are being treated in a different way than other people are based on their distinctions. That's what anti-racism is. We are color aware, but we're not color hypersensitive. We don't see everything through the lens of race. That's what racists do.
And as a psychoanalyst, I had a goal, which is to access unconscious feelings around race. So my work is actually about accessing unconscious negative feelings and ideas in the unconscious. So I was normalizing negative feelings, which is also what I do in my practice in psychoanalysis and psychotherapy.
So I'm going to read this again. You said, I had fantasies of unloading a revolver into the head of any white person that got in my way, burying their body and wiping bloody hands as I walked away relatively guiltless with a bounce in my step, like I did the world an effing favor.
Again, that's what psychopaths can do. Psychopathy is defined as the lack of remorse or empathy. Her fantasy is her reality. If that were to happen, so for example, she didn't do it. If somebody else did it, she wouldn't feel a twinge of remorse. not a twinge of guilt, not a twinge of empathy for that individual. That is how deeply seated this hatred is, and that's what psychopathy is. If you study serial killers, okay, that if you study serial killers, uh, Son of Sam, the the bind, torture, kill serial killer. You study or you just watch some documentaries on them. All of them were acting out rage that they felt against. Most of the time, these male serial killers had extremely abusive, extremely objectifying mothers. Okay. And mothers who did not protect them from possibly stepfathers or something, but they came from and they were humiliated uh, by their mothers, and their mothers exercised a lot of shame and blame and fear. They had mother hatred, and the things they do to these women are unempathetic, totally remorseless actions of rage to act out the victimhood that they feel like they experienced in their childhood. But they're acting out the rage of someone else, and of what something that someone else did, and they're seeing the individual with whom they hate, and a female in the individual on whom they're projecting their rage and hatred. This is the same type of psychopathic mindset as a serial killer. She's unfolding a serial killer's mindset here.
That type of feeling, first of all, what creates that type of feeling uh, in a person of color toward white people, and how common do you believe that feeling is?
So the feeling of frustration and rage is actually very common.
People get frustrated. People get frustrated at work. They get frustrated when they're not treated right. They get frustrated when they feel like they've been treated unfairly. They may get even angry. It is not normal to fantasize about murdering someone. That is not normal. I don't know anyone. I meet people who share a lot of stuff with me. They do not share fantasies with me about killing people, and I don't believe it's because they don't feel like they can talk to me. I don't believe they have them. She's saying that fantasies of killing people and harming people is quite common. The reason why you make it race based is because of the perpetuated um, cult and group think that all of those people are responsible for this, that, and the other, and they all think this, that, or the other. And we do not. We do not all think the same way. We do not all operate the same way. Millions of people are in interracial marriages and relationships. There are millions of biracial children. If we all thought the same way, if we all thought this way, none of that would even exist. And there is a desire that none of that will exist because we will all be split up into camps.
And I'm talking about it sort of metaphorically about how difficult it is to actually have an honest, direct conversation with somebody on race, because what you're coming up against is defenses. That's not happening. You're the problem. You're seeing things. And it's that level of frustration. So I'm talking metaphorically about the level of frustration, and I'm not speaking literally, but I am speaking about a futility, a feeling of futility about not being able to move further in a conversation. And I think that that feeling is very common amongst people of color.
Have you ever expressed that fantasy before in an academic setting or any other formal professional setting?
No, but in not around race, but I think around fantasies of killing are actually very common among psychoanalysts. It's like sort of the work that we do. And talking about that kind of stuff in forensic psychiatry is also very common. I think it got flagged because it's around race.
No, it got flagged because the title of the discussion was The Psychopathic Problem of the White Mind. It wasn't specifically about race, it's about racism. It's about a judgment or a label, a classification, an identification, a stigmatization of one racial group uh, the entire collective as being psychopathic. And then, thank goodness for a confessor. A lot of times a narcissist will let their confession slip. So will a psychopath. A lot of times they catch because they are so grandiose in their beliefs and their superiority. Their confessions actually slip out of their mouth. But dealing with people who are psychopathic or suffer from psychopathy, and are violent, yeah, those fantasies may be quite common. But in general, psychoanalysis, it's not common. Some person could really be angry at, say, their boss, but it is extremely rare that because of one's boss, that the an overbearing, domineering boss, that individual goes in and wants to annihilate the whole workplace. That is extreme. That is uncommon. That is rare for those fantasies. And to say otherwise, I mean, this is really troubling.
That was my next question. I mean, you're a trained expert. You're trained in psychoanalysis, and when we think about psychoanalysis, I mean, we enter all kinds of spaces around violence, around sex, around all. I mean, what's in the mind is boundless, right? But something different happened here. Were you shocked that in a context where you're around peers, around other people who sort of know the various precincts of the mind that you can travel to, were you surprised that you got this kind of response?
Are you talking about the aftermath, or which part are you talking about right now? Just what happened over the past
Oh,
week?
actually, that
Okay, there's so much here. She's going to say that she's surprised. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. She's going to say that she is surprised at the reaction she got. And the very fact that she was surprised should be shocking. Could you imagine a psychoanalyst giving this same talk and talking about the psychopathic problem of the black mind? It would blow up. It would go crazy. So, why is she surprised? Why is this supposed expert surprised that to use this type of speech will be shocking, and it's inappropriate? There are dozens and dozens of other examples. This is dragging critical theory and critical race theory into the arena of psychoanalysis. Okay. And basically, when you get to the point where someone feels like they're a victim, someone feels like they're oppressed, and all of those people do it, you get in a state, all of those people and these people are responsible for it. That's what causes psychosis and a break from reality, because that is a break from reality. That's what white supremacists do. All of America's problem, or all of the nation's problem, are caused by black people, or the anti-Semitism. It's the Jews. That's what the Nazis did. That's what the Nazis did. That's how you create, through propaganda campaigns, this groupthink that causes the annihilation of an entire people group, mass genocide. And if you think that this is a joke, I've done studies. I do these studies myself. Okay, I don't have her degree, but a man and a woman don't need that degree. This is common sense. But that's where these people get so academiaized, they lose all grip with reality. They lose common sense. They can't even think. They can't even think right because they lose all grip with reality because of their education. My dad used to call these foremen who came in with these ideas college educated idiots. It's not what I'm calling this Dr. Aruna Khilanani. But am I saying, is she too educated for her own good? But the point is, it seems so shocking to her. But to the common man, the common woman of any race, I think this language, it should be shocking.
That's a great point, right? So I guess the first question is, because most of us only got to hear it, we didn't get to see it because the audio was leaked. First of all, what was the response from the people in the room, and was that different than the response from people outside?
So from people in the room, it was all positive. It was something that
I have a shocking revelation to let you know. if the audio or video was leaked, someone had a problem with this. It wasn't all positive. Someone was shocked by this, and someone thought the world should know about this. What happens when you are in a position of power, like she was in a position of power given this class? People don't say what they actually feel because they're afraid of the backlash. And that's what someone who really would have been troubled in this meeting by her language and by her examples, they would have been afraid. Tell me you wouldn't have been afraid to speak up. And tell me, especially in this current cancel culture environment, you'd be afraid to speak up and say, hey, whoa, you know, um, I'm glad you don't feel that way anymore. But the direction she goes, and I think there's going to be another clip, she goes in a direction with it which makes it more than just about an example of an underlying feeling. It makes it about racism, not just psychoanalysis.
Never seen in a grand rounds before, which is all the people of color were speaking up and speaking up first. And something interesting also happened, which is a lot of the white people felt sort of emotionally safe enough to ask vulnerable questions, to put themselves out there, but it was an overwhelmingly positive response.
Wow. So the
Yeah.
controversy comes afterward. And when we're going to take a short break, we're going to come back and I want to talk about the controversy after and why you think that's happening. Everybody stay with me. We'll be back with more of an exclusive B&T interview right after this. Welcome back to Black News Tonight. I'm still here with Dr. Aruna Khilanani as we talk exclusively about her content of her virtual talk, The Psychopathic Problem of the White Mind. Before we talk about the kind of consequences there of your speech, I want to talk a little bit more about some of the things that you said in the speech that I thought were interesting and compelling. You said, this is the cost of talking to white people. The cost of your own life as they suck you dry. There are no good apples out there. White people make my blood boil. When you say there are no good apples out there, what kind of claim are you making?
I'm talking about people have this idea that racism is something that if you're consciously racist or if you're a Klan member, and I'm sort of making the claim that racism is something that is unconscious and it is actually in everyone, and everyone uses these words systemic. They're like,
By your own words, you will be acquitted or convicted. That's what the Bible says. By her own words, she's saying that it's invisible and it's in everyone. But the claim of critical theory and critical race theory is it's only in white people. But we have a consummate confessor, a person who is actively participating in racism, who's letting you know that it's in everyone. See, people don't have a problem with talking about racism and making opening things up to the awareness of where people may be ignorant of the ways it's being practiced, and actually this building a collective sense of a need to speak out, a need to no longer be silent about the things we see, and to speak out when we. I did it in the workplace where this sister had not been hired on, but many other people who came into the workforce at exactly the same time or even after her had been converted to full time employment. Well, I started raising. I said, why is it with her work ethic and her character, why are all these other people hired and she's not? And she happened to, the only difference between happened to be that she was African American. This is the way you counter racism. This is the way you at least bring up the question: what is the motivation for not converting? And she was hired, but convert to a full time employee with benefits, and to create this collective awareness that when we see it, we need to recognize it as a group of workers, white and black and Latino or whatever type of group. As a group, we raise the questions, and we create an environment we don't have to be afraid of. Nobody's afraid of talking about racism. Nobody's afraid of talking about prejudice and discrimination. What they have trouble with is psychopathic fantasies. What they have trouble with is labeling, uh, shaming, blaming, this fear mongering, the violent rhetoric that is condoned in this type of groupthink.
I know that racism is systemic, and yet individually, when you call them out, they'll be like, well, it's not me, you can't say that. And so there's a disconnect between use of the word systemic and saying that racism is everywhere, but the moment you point it out individually, there's sort of people disown their own violence and racism.
Would it be fair to say, based on your expertise, that white people are psychopathic?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's many lies that, and didn't get to that part because what I delivered was only part of a first series of talks. But the level of lying that white people do that has started since colonialism, we're just used to it. Such
What
as
kind of lies?
every time that you steal a country, you loot, you say you've discovered something. I mean, this level of lie is actually part of history. We don't say that we killed all these people, we got rid of all the Native Americans. We say we discovered America.
Um, I don't know anybody alive today who discovered America or thinks they discovered America or found America. I don't know anybody alive today who does not realize that there were great atrocities committed against the indigenous people, the American Indian people. Um, I don't know anybody alive today who doesn't realize a lot of the dirt of the American history and the American present. There's a lot of backdoor political deals that go on, covert operations, covert military operations that go on all the time. And we don't all know about those things. That's not all of our story. And I, as a veteran, have seen some things, and some things remain classified that I know that the American people doesn't want to know. There's some inconvenient truths in the present day reality of America, but that doesn't make everybody the one who's writing the narrative or the false narrative, and writing the lie or believing the lie. We don't all believe the lie. We didn't all believe the lie of the Iraqi war. That ended up being totally a lie. The chemical, biological warfare weapons, the nuclear weapons. I didn't believe that for a minute. Okay, that still doesn't mean we have the power to change the narrative. Okay, but we're talking specifically. She's talking about racism, and we're not all saying the same story. We're not all afraid of having the conversation or afraid whatsoever of having the conversation, but to tell the story from her narrative and the narrative of critical race theory that it is in everyone. Now, she made the confession. It's in her. The lies come from her as well. She's telling a lie. She's perpetuating a lie in these talks. She knows she's guilty.
You don't talk about the level of death. You don't talk about the level of what actually occurred. You wipe the slate clean, you sanitize the violence, and you actually got lost along the way. You're trying to go to India, and then you say you discovered something. And
Oh, and yeah, we're not even talking about the violence that took place in connection with a lot of the riots lately. We're justifying the violence based on the perception, the immediate perception that something that involved a police officer was a murder, okay, or they call it an execution. Some of these times have been even found that the shooting was justifiable. Sometimes this has been found justifiable when the attorney general or the state's attorney, the prosecutor, was African American, and especially when they found out. I don't have enough details going on, but they found out, and the people who were reviewing the case were primarily African Americans. And after they reviewed all the evidence, it was found to be just a justifiable shooting that equaled the lethal force was used against the officer, and the officer retaliated or responded in lethal force. Okay, so but the first statement that comes out, the first lie that comes out is either it's called a murder or it's called an execution. All that does is rile people up, stoke the flames of racial hatred and division, and can cultivate the race war that they're trying to start.
this level of discovery is everywhere. You've discovered vegetarianism. You know, you've discovered yoga, you've discovered everything is a discovery, and it's all actually stolen.
So what you're talking about at this point is a kind of macro level, systemic, structural kind of thing. But you're
Mhm.
also trained to think about the psyche, which is about the
Yeah,
individual at a certain level. To
absolutely.
what extent can we say that individual white people are psychopathic or unhealthy or out of their minds? I'm using this language for those who are watching. I'm using this language based on what was in the speech and based on other work that's been published. This isn't necessarily my personal opinion, it's the analysis here. Do you think, to what extent can we say that individual white people are this thing versus saying that there's a culture of theft, a culture of colonialism? And is there a useful distinction to be made between the two?
I think that I think people there is a useful distinction to be made, and on one level, yes, that's absolutely true, and you know, it's different than actual individual psychopathy, the way that people conceive of it. On another level, when we are thinking about individual responsibility and how it is that people change, I think that using the words systemic and there's a culture operate defensively to not actually let yourself go into your own unconscious and go into those dark places of what you're actually doing. So I'm actually talking about it sort of as a defensive structure, like not acknowledging that on an individual level, I think can operate as a defense.
You say that we need to remember that directly talking to white people is a waste of time. It's useless, you say,
Mhm.
because they are at the
Mhm.
wrong level of conversation. Addressing
Mhm.
racism assumes that white people can see and process what we're talking about. If white people are incapable of being engaged on race, and there's a
Yeah.
structural dynamic that makes it somewhat impossible, or at least makes racism intractable, then are we in a place of hopelessness around racism? What are we to do?
No, I was talking about a feeling of futility, right? So I'm talking
Hmm.
metaphorically about a feeling of futility, and the disconnect that I'm talking about is that white people actually they have a different conscious experience of themselves rather than what they're actually doing. So my entire first series is what is the disconnect between their identity, how they see themselves, and what they're actually doing? What is the disconnect between their actions and how they view themselves? So I'm saying the reason they can't get it at this moment in time, and what the first series is what is white identity? How do they view themselves that is actually very different from their actions? So sort of naming that problem first so that we can actually move forward and talk about race.
I was going to try to let this play till the end, but this how does somebody else tell another person what their identity is? That's what, that would be like, I don't subscribe to black identity. Every person is different. Every individual is different. I'm going to do a third video that's going to kind of link up with this. I believe there are some cultural differences, but she's explaining this as if um, we don't know who we are. But the problem is, and we, I look at things far more individualistically than collectively, and I think in a large part, we don't have this cult like this is whiteness mentality. We don't have that. We don't experience the world that way. We don't experience if something happened to me, my neighbors and this person and that person wouldn't they would feel for me, but they wouldn't necessarily think it happened to them. In other words, somebody did something to me, they wouldn't say, oh, look what they did to us. That wouldn't be we wouldn't have that collective mindset. Now when you're racist, I would assume that that would be the collective mindset of those who think as in white supremacy, white nationalism. When they see something that an African American or another minority does to a white person, they say, look what they are doing to us. So, this very different dichotomy here of seeing collective is almost a confession of what makes white supremacy the view of everything through the view of race. And what makes this also racism is that this to take this collective view of everything from a racial point of view, and that all of those people are this, that, or the other. I got to let this play till the end.
Sometimes we say things and we do harm with our words, we upset people, and we regret it. And then there are times where we have to say, at least I believe, that just because white people are mad doesn't mean we did anything wrong, right?
Right.
that we shouldn't infantilize white people. We shouldn't center white people all the time. Which one of these are we dealing with in the case of your lecture at Yale? Is this a situation where you feel like you did some things that you could do differently, or that you did harm that was unintended? Or is this a case where white people are upset because they're being named and outed and subjected to scrutiny?
So I think the way that I framed the lecture was I sort of said that what is happening in this space is I'm giving you, since conversation around race is always hard, I'm inviting you into a room where we talk about you. And this is sort of a special invitation to first see how we view you, because that might be very different than your conscious experience of yourself.
I'm going to have to. I have to stop this again. We're inviting you into a space where we're going to talk about you. Imagine that being done in an opposite way. Imagine inviting, any minority into a room where we're going to talk about you. It would blow up. It would be unheard of. You aren't giving someone a very appealing invitation when you invite them into a place where you're going to define them through the lens of who you tell them that they are. I can't tell somebody else who they are based on this wide sweeping cult like mindset, this collective mindset, this group identity mindset. And just the idea that that's some kind of a blessing to be talked about. It wouldn't be a blessing if it was done the other way around. Now, who's turning into the teacher here? Who's turning into um, the psychopathic nice guy? You know, she thinks she's doing people a favor. This is what's wrong. This group think, and this ideology thinks it's doing people a favor when it's creating flames of division.
So it's sort of an invitation into sort of a sacred space to see how it is that white people are actually viewed.
So if you were able to give the speech, or if you give the speech again, would you use the same example? Would you appeal to the same fantasy metaphor, or would you do something different?
Well, you have to keep in mind the audience, right? So the audience that I spoke to are psychiatrists and mental health workers, and I'm talking about psychoanalytic stuff. And if they can't go there into those dark places, then I'm not sure like how we're going to be able to move forward. I do think that if it's a different audience, I probably wouldn't have used those metaphors. And I would cater it to who the audience is and what I feel like they're able to tolerate. But people in our profession are actually used to sitting with very dark feelings. It's our job to metabolize negative feelings. It's our job to make connections between the conscious and the unconscious. That is what we do. We in our practices we teach people how to tolerate those very dark places in their life that they normally can't actually go. And that's actually where we need to go in order to move forward on race. So I'm speaking to a group of highly trained individuals, medical professionals that are trained in doing this kind of thing and understand the importance of going into negative feelings, because if you can't actually tolerate your negative feelings, they're going to come out in actions and they'll actually harm yourself and you'll harm someone else as well. So for that
Since this
audience, I wouldn't
audio has
change it.
been leaked,
What was
since this
that?
audio was leaked, you have been since this audio was leaked, you've been a target of the right. You've been on every conservative dartboard.
Yep.
What's life been like for you?
It wasn't fun. Definitely wasn't fun. It's been really hard because, like I said, that this talk was for a certain group of people. And imagine that the group of people, like I said, this talk was for people who want to understand and are ready to hear about their own violence. That is how I framed it. Now, and I think of it in the sort of like the same way I think about psychotherapy. People come into psychotherapy and they come into psychoanalysis who are ready. They're ready to actually reflect. They don't want to keep saying the problem is outside of me. It's the world. It's my boyfriend. It's my child. It's this. They know that they need to do the inner work. Now imagine that the talk suddenly got leaked to the very same population of people that aren't ready to do the work and actually don't think that there's a problem. So if you aren't ready to do the work and you don't think there's a problem, what's going to happen?
The problem is the doctor doesn't, she's not ready to do the work. She doesn't think there's a problem with this. I can't. There's only about 30 seconds left, which are you're not going to miss anything. She feels no remorse about using these words, and this was supposed to be about psychoanalysis, not about race, not about racism, not about defining white people as psychopathic. So, and the technique to get to the underlying dark. I've heard a lot of dark stuff. I've dealt with a lot of personal dark stuff from my past, and yeah, you got to get down to it. But beneath these visualizations of how you'd like to get even or get back or respond to who you feel like your oppressors are, there's still an underlying belief, and that belief is usually victim status or persecution status. I mean, but through the Word of God, fasting and prayer, and the change of my heart when I gave my life to Jesus Christ, I don't have those feelings anymore. And I don't believe even people who are unbelievers, I don't believe they have those feelings. I don't believe it's what she claims it is. But let's look at something, because she's so learned. I'm going to see if I don't drop this off. These are the definitions of what a psychopath looks like. Okay, they have superficiality, superficially charming, silver-tongued. I think that's kind of a description of the good doctor here. And if you notice, Marc Lamont Hill's interview was not confrontational at all. This is almost like giving her a way to out herself, giving her a free pass. Okay, I've seen any person on his show that disagrees with the ideology and philosophy of critical theory and critical race theory. He attacks them. He cuts them off. He doesn't let them respond to questions. He doesn't let them give logical. It turns into an emotional feeding frenzy of debate and argument. There was nothing in this where he expressed any ire over these thoughts and feelings. It's just she's an expert on this, right? And that's a problem. We got some people considered experts who have a personal and psychopathic agenda, period. So superficially charming and silver-tongued. That's what all of these academics are, and all of these the academia that supports this counter racism. They're silver-tongued. Their books paint everything with a silver lining. They pit two people against each other. They demonize one group and victimize the other. Self-absorbed and egocentric. I mean, that's what these are descriptive characteristics of psychopaths. They're egocentric. They think only on their own selves and their own identity, be that an individual identity. A psychopath is only out for themselves. And when you have group psychopathy, you have a group of people who is only looking out for their own identity. Easily bored, in need of constant stimulation. 4, habitual liars. That's the only point that she brought up that was the condemnation of white people. It was like lying about history, okay, which historians did that. Educators did that. Academia did that. That wasn't like, let's get together and make up a story. And most civilizations and most nations do not tell all their dirty, just like most individuals. They don't air all their dirty laundry. Every nation on earth has dirty laundry, including the indigenous people. They waged war against one another. American Indians, they had tribalism. They had warfare. Okay, it wasn't just a nation of peace, but let's go on. Shows no remorse, rationalizes wrongdoing, says people deserve it. That was how she concluded her remarks. She says she had no remorse for them. She rationalized her wrongdoing. Says that those psychopathic white people deserve to be told who they are. A lack of empathy, exploits the goodwill of others, especially financially. We've seen that in the co-founder of Black Lives Matter and the 5 mansions she has, and other ones of these alleged social justice warriors. They're gaining. They are milking the profits. This is profiteering. This is race hustling. This is a race hustling industry, okay? Exploits the goodwill of others, especially financially. That's what they're out to do. They're out to write a book. They're out to start a show. They're out to have a Lifetime movie made out of them. You know, they're out for a movie deal. Sexually promiscuous. Is she telling white people they're sexually promiscuous? Impulsive. Okay. Okay. Impulsivity. Unable to control your physical actions. Riots, protests, fires, pillaging, violence, throwing Molotov cocktails. That would be impulsive behavior. Reckless behavior. That's also one of the descriptors of psychopaths. Accepts no responsibility for actions. Okay. Bad bad behavior. Had behavior problems as a child. That's a core thing to look for as a definition of a psychopath. You know, childhood problems of behavior conduct disorder. Oh, shoot. Reckless behavior, accepts no responsibility for actions, lacks inhibitions. Nothing can stop this silver-tongued devil of a psychopath. The things that people normally wouldn't say or do, a psychopath will. Has no long-term goals. Okay, what was this supposed to be? What good was this talk supposed to give? And what good is this racial divisiveness supposed to do? What's the long-term goal of white supremacy and race? All white people are racist and everything about this is, you know, what's the long-term goal? Is the destruction of the United States of America. Has many short-term relationships. There's been a lot of people that have come in and out of these conversations. No respect for authority, including the law, or including just the normal decorum of a classroom. We wouldn't be, and even in psychoanalysis, you wouldn't have made it race-based. You wouldn't have made it this skewed. No respect for authority, including the law. I think we've seen a lot of that from this whole critical theory mindset, thinking they are never wrong. Okay, so she thinks, there's nothing wrong with any aspect of what she did, and she will do it again. May be highly intelligent, but has no conscience. Psychopaths are these serial killers and people who, and especially some psychopaths are known to be company CEOs, cult leaders, even religious leaders can be psychopathic, that they're using their congregation or their people for financial gain, and they can quite well know the Bible, quite well know the scripture, but they lack the conscience to not do the things that they're doing to the people they're doing them to. Everything I've watched in the combination between this video and the last video about Aruna Khilanani and reading those 20 indicators. See, it's not just one thing that you want to. You don't diagnose anything or anyone as a psychopath based on one metrics or one thing that clicks the box. There's a spectrum of things that people look at to diagnose someone as a psychopath, and it certainly it wouldn't boil down to lying about history. And I didn't tell that lie. I didn't write those stories. Okay, most of us didn't who are alive today. We didn't write the history books. We're not historians. We're not academics. And like I said, extremely intelligent, but lacks a conscience. All right, this is way longer than I planned. Please forgive me. I hope you hung in there as long as you can. If you think this is like good questions, please post a comment. Let me know what you think. Share if you care. Share on Facebook. Share through text message. And I had some negative comments posted. Yeah, whatever you want to. You know, I'm not trying to control anybody. I'm not trying to force somebody to think something against their will. I'm not trying to coerce a confession out of somebody. See, this whole dogma, this whole critical race theory and critical theory ideology is trying to take over. Okay, and I'm going to do some more videos. First one is I want to set the foundation of what is critical theory itself. What is its origin and what does it seek to do? Because critical race theory is falling under the umbrella of critical theory. They cannot be separated. As much as you want to separate it, the aspect of intersectionality, which is their organizing platform, this is a movement. This is a movement to overthrow an entire nation and an entire system and an entire thing that makes us who we are as Americans. One nation under God with liberty and justice for all. Okay? And we have not always been the highest and best aspirations of what our Constitution set forth. But we have striven for, we have worked for, among all nations, we have labored intensively to birth a higher and better version of our nation. And we are a nation that among all nations of the earth is the most diverse, the least racist, with the highest opportunities in the world. And yet people are flocking to our border, wanting to get in to a nation which some people say they hate. Or some people not say, some people hate this nation. Okay? They want us to hate this nation. They want us to despise this nation. They want us to despise this flag, which African American brothers and sisters died for this flag. Okay? Latino Americans died for this flag. People of all nations and tribes and tongues and kindreds died to uphold the original constitutional. And I'm not a nationalist at all. I could admit all our dirt as a nation. We've got dirt. We've got old history dirt, present day dirt. We've got a corrupt political system. We've got corrupt bureaucracies throughout the corrupt corporate bureaucracies, corrupt social institutions, corrupt religious institutions, all through this nation. But we're still striving towards the highest and best version of ourselves, just as we do as individuals. Okay? As individuals, we're supposed to not be defined by all the things of our past, but be defined as we progress and grow to be the highest, best version of ourselves. All right, this is Brother Rob Wilson. Peace and love in Jesus' name. Amen.